Speak, prosody rate equals -5%, the Vexian hegemony, in all its gleaming, obsidian and light-infused glory, considered humanity a cosmic punchline. From their crystalline spires that pierced the void to their star-spanning armada of hypersymmetric warships, the Vexians embodied perfection. Their ships, the Star Silks, were whispered legends across the arm, capable of weaving through nebulae like ghosts and dissecting lesser fleets with surgical precision. They moved with the grace of predators, their energy signatures a purring hum of controlled power. And humanity? Humanity was the cosmic equivalent of a grease stain on a pristine marble floor. End quote. They cling to life in vessels cobbled from forgotten eras, Grand Admiral Xylos, end quote. Heard the holographic projection of strategist Prime Vlora, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the simulated star map of the human sector. End quote. Their Endopos, ships and Opos, are little more than glorified scrap heaps, held together by what their own archives refer to as Endopos, duct tape and prayers, Endopos, a truly primitive species, end quote. Xylos, a being of pure, unblemished logic and aesthetic superiority, merely inclined his head. End quote. Indeed, their very existence is an affront to galactic order. We have observed their Endopos, scavenging Endopos, for cycles. They pick through the refuse of our former conquests, the discarded husks of our prototypes, even the debris fields of ancient, forgotten wars. They are cosmic parasites, feeding on the remnants of true civilization. End quote. His voice was a low, resonant thrum, devoid of emotion, yet dripping with disdain. End quote. Their Endopos, ingenuity Endopos, is merely a crude mimicry, a desperate attempt to replicate what they cannot create. End quote. Meanwhile, light years away, Captain Kalen, a woman whose perpetually oil-stained jumpsuit was practically a second skin, slammed a wrench against a sputtering conduit. End quote. Whisper, get that flux capacitor realigned before we start glowing like a discount nebula. End quote. Her ship, the ironclad Fury, was less a vessel and more a testament to humanity and Opos' stubborn refusal to die. Its hull was a patchwork quilt of salvaged plating from a dozen different species and Opos' wrecks, its engines a symphony of mismatched parts humming and occasionally screaming in discordant harmony. Inside, the air hummed with the scent of ozone, stale coffee, and the unique metallic tang of human ingenuity pushed to its absolute breaking point. The bridge was a chaotic symphony of blinking lights, jury-rigged consoles, and the constant, reassuring clatter of tools. End quote. Almost there, Cap, end quote, yelled Whisper, a lanky individual with a knack for coaxing life out of dead tech, their fingers dancing over a sparking panel. End quote. Just needs a little persuasion. End quote. A shower of sparks, a guttural groan from the ship and Opos' core, and then, miraculously, the conduit pulsed with a steady, if slightly uneven, glow. Kalen grinned, a smudge of grease highlighting the crinkles around her eyes. End quote. Good. Wooden and Opos, T want to miss the next big score. Heard there and Opos. A derelict hegemony scout cruiser out near the Rigel debris field. Probably just a burnout shell, but you never know what shiny bits they left behind. End quote. Her crew, a motley collection of misfits, scavengers, and ex-pirates, grumbled good-naturedly. They were the end quote, scrap fleet, end quote, a loosely affiliated network of human vessels that roamed the galactic fringes, living off what others discarded. They were the ultimate recyclers, the universe and Opos' dumpster divers, and they were damn good at it. They had to be. Their very survival depended on it. Then, the news hit. A galaxy-wide broadcast, pristine and chilling, from the Vexian hegemony. Grand Admiral Xylos himself, his perfectly sculpted features filling every screen. End quote. To all lesser species inhabiting the fringe sectors. End quote. His voice resonated. End quote. The Vexian hegemony has deemed your presence an inefficiency, a blight upon the cosmic tapestry. Our and Opos, purification fleet and Opos, has been dispatched. Consider this your final warning. Evacuate or be cleansed. The era of disorder ends. The era of Vexian perfection begins. End quote. A stunned silence fell over the ironclad Fury and Opos' bridge. Kalen and Apo's grin vanished, replaced by a hard line. End quote. Purification fleet. End quote. She muttered, the words tasting like ash. End quote. Those arrogant, shiny bastards. They think they can just sweep us away. End quote. Whisper looked up, a rare flicker of fear in their eyes. End quote. Cap, their fleet is it and Apo's immense. And their tech is centuries beyond anything we and Apo's VE ever salvaged. End quote. Kalen stared at the retreating image of Xylos. A slow, dangerous glint entered her eyes. End quote. Yeah, end quote. She said, her voice low, end quote. But they and Apo's V never seen what happens when you try to sweep away a species that thrives on the mess you leave behind. They laughed at our rust buckets. They and Apo's about to find out what happens when those rust buckets start fighting back. End quote. The end quote. Scrap fleet end quote. Wasn't and Apo's TA fleet in the traditional sense. There were no grand admirals, no rigid formations, no unified command structure. It was a chaotic, decentralized network of independent operators, each captain a king or queen of their own rust bucket domain. But when the Vexian broadcast echoed through the void, something shifted. 1,000 comm channels, usually buzzing with haggling over salvage rights or warnings about rogue asteroid fields, fell silent, then erupted with a furious, defiant roar. End quote. They want to cleanse us? End quote. Snarled and Apo's Gearhead and Apo's Jax, captain of the Mangled Star, a freighter that looked like it had lost a fight with a black hole and won. End quote. Cleansing is what we do to their derelicts. They and Apo's about to get a taste of their own medicine, Vexian style. End quote. Captain Kalen, her comms console a spiderweb of incoming signals, leaned back, a grim satisfaction settling over her. End quote. See, Whisper? I told you. You Don and Apo's kick a junkyard dog and expect it to roll over. End quote. The first Vexian probes arrived, sleek, silent darts of light that zipped through the void, scanning, assessing, utterly oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their pristine sensors. They registered the human ships as, end quote, low threat, inefficient, and structurally unsound. End quote. A Vexian tactical analysis predicted a 99.7% chance of immediate human capitulation or swift annihilation. They had factored in everything except the sheer, unadulterated spite of a species told it wasn't Apo's good enough. End quote. All right, listen up, you magnificent bastards of the scrap fleet. End quote. Kalen and Apo's voice crackled over the emergency comms, a raw, unpolished roar that cut through the static. End quote. They and Apo's recoming. The shiny ones. The ones who think their perfection makes them untouchable. They think we and Apo's just going to roll over and let them sweep us into the cosmic dustbin. Well, I say we show them what happens when you try to sweep up a pile of razor blades and broken glass. End quote. A chorus of cheers, whoops, and the distinct sound of a wrench hitting metal echoed back. End quote. Operation Rust Bucket Rodeo is a go. End quote. Kalen declared, a dangerous glint in her eyes. End quote. We and Apo's not running. We and Apo's not hiding. We and Apo's going to give them a tour of our junkyard, and then we and Apo's going to turn their star silks into more scrap for our collection. End quote. The Vexian purification fleet arrived in the human sector with the precision of a cosmic ballet. Thousands of star silks, their hulls shimmering with an ethereal glow, formed an impenetrable wall of light and power. Grand Admiral Xylos, observing from the command deck of his flagship, the Purity and Apo's edge, felt a familiar surge of logical satisfaction. This was order. This was efficiency. This was the end of human squalor. End quote. Initial scans indicate scattered, disorganized human vessels. End quote. Reported strategist Prime Vlora. End quote. Their energy signatures are erratic, their movements chaotic. A predictable response from such an unsophisticated species. End quote. Xylos nodded. End quote. Initiate standard cleansing protocols. Target their largest concentrations first. Minimize energy expenditure. This will be a swift, surgical operation. End quote. What the Vexians didn't and Apo's understand was that, end quote, scattered, end quote, and, end quote, disorganized, end quote, was humanity and Apo's natural state. It was their strength. Each human ship, a unique monstrosity of salvaged tech, had its own eccentricities, its own quirks, its own hidden surprises. They were like a swarm of angry, unpredictable hornets, each one buzzing with a different frequency, making it impossible for the Vexian sensors to get a clean lock. The first volley of Vexian energy lances sliced through the void, aimed at what their algorithms identified as the primary human aggregation, But the aggregation, wasn't Apos, TA formation. It was a swirling, jumbled mass of ships, each one executing a seemingly random, yet perfectly timed, evasive maneuver. The lances, designed for precision strikes against predictable targets, mostly found empty space or harmlessly glanced off reinforced, jury-rigged plating. What in the void? Hissed a Vexian tactical officer. Their evasion patterns are illogical. They are not adhering to any known combat doctrine. On the ironclad Fury and Apos, S-Bridge, Kalen cackled. Combat doctrine? We invented and Apos, winging it and Apos, before you shiny boys figured out how to tie your own shoelaces. Whisper, get that old K and Apos, their shield generator online. Let and Apos, see how their and Apos, surgical precision and Apos, handles a wall of repurposed alien tech. The K and Apos, their shield, salvaged from a forgotten battlefield and jury-rigged to run on human-modified power conduits, flared to life, a shimmering, unstable barrier that pulsed with an erratic, unpredictable frequency. It wasn't Apos, T elegant, it wasn't Apos, T perfect, but it was there, a defiant middle finger to Vexian perfection. The Vexian fleet, accustomed to targets that either fled in terror or engaged in predictable, symmetrical warfare, found themselves bewildered. Their advanced targeting systems, designed for optimal efficiency against known combat profiles, struggled to lock onto the human vessels. The Star Silks were built for speed and precision, not for chasing a swarm of buzzing, unpredictable gnats. Their energy signatures are fluctuating wildly, reported a Vexian sensor officer, his voice betraying a hint of something akin to confusion. One moment, a vessel appears to be on the verge of critical failure. The next it flares with an inexplicable energy surge. This was the human touch. Every human ship was a living, breathing experiment in applied chaos. A sudden power surge wasn't and Apos, TA malfunction. It was Whisper rerouting auxiliary power through the main conduits, bypassing safety protocols to give the shields a temporary, suicidal boost. A sudden dip in energy wasn't Apos, TA sign of weakness. It was Apos, Sparky and Apos, Finn, the ironclad Fury and Apos, resident explosives expert, siphoning power to charge up a custom-built, highly unstable plasma torpedo. They and Apos, retrying to predict us, Kalen mused, watching the Vexian lances miss by meters. Bless their little logical hearts. They think we have a pattern. We dawn and Apos, we have a vibe. The first human counterattack wasn't Apos, a coordinated volley. It was a desperate, audacious lunge. The mangled Star, with Jax at the helm, suddenly veered sharply, its mismatched engines screaming in protest, and rammed a derelict, pre-Vexian mining drone directly into the path of an incoming Star Silk. The drone, packed with scavenged, highly volatile mining charges, detonated in a spectacular, unplanned explosion, sending shrapnel and debris scattering. The Star Silk, designed to deflect energy, not kinetic impacts, buckled. Its pristine hull was scarred, its shields flickering. The Vexian crew, utterly unprepared for such a crude, illogical attack, recoiled in shock. They used debris as a weapon? Sputtered a Vexian commander, his voice incredulous. That is not a recognized combat tactic. Recognized by whom, exactly? Kalen muttered, a smirk playing on her lips. The guys who write the rulebook on how to lose gracefully? Not us. The scrap fleet, emboldened by Jax and Apos' audacious move, began to unleash their own brand of chaotic warfare. They launched ancient, repurposed escape pods packed with proximity mines salvaged from a dozen different species. They deployed clouds of ionized scrap metal, designed to confuse Vexian sensors. They even used salvaged, pre-collapse galactic comms arrays to broadcast ear-splitting, human-made music at frequencies designed to disrupt Vexian comms. There and Apo's, music and Apo's, is causing severe auditory distress, shrieked a Vexian comms officer, clutching his head. It is discordant, illogical. It has no discernible pattern. Xylos, observing the chaos from the purity and Apo's edge, felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation prickle at the edges of his perfect logic. This was not the swift, surgical cleansing he had envisioned. This was a mess. A glorious, defiant, human mess. Grand Admiral, Vlora reported, her voice strained, There and Apo's, ships and Apo's, are displaying unexpected capabilities. One vessel, designated and Apo's, Rusty Nail and Apo's, just deployed a localized gravity well generator salvage from AK and Apo's, their heavy cruiser, pulling 3 of our Starsilks off course. Xylos and Apo's optical sensors narrowed. AK and Apo's, their gravity well? How could they? That technology is highly complex. It requires precise calibration. They appear to have, and Apo's, overclocked and Apo's. Grand Admiral, Vlora replied, a hint of something that sounded suspiciously like awe in her tone. It is unstable, highly dangerous, and completely beyond our predictive models. They are using our own discarded technology against us, but in ways we never conceived. Kalen, watching the chaos unfold, felt a surge of exhilaration. That and Apo's. The thing about perfection, shiny boys, she whispered to herself. It leaves no room for surprises. And we, my friends, are the universe and Apo's biggest surprise party. The Vexian purification fleet, designed for precision and efficiency, was finding itself bogged down in a swamp of human-generated chaos. Their star silks, built for elegant maneuvers in open space, struggled to navigate the ever-shifting minefields of repurposed debris and the erratic gravitational anomalies thrown by the human scrap fleet. It was like trying to swat a swarm of flies with a diamond-encrusted sledgehammer. Ineffective and increasingly frustrating. Grand Admiral Xylos, his logical processes churning through unprecedented data, felt a flicker of something akin to irritation. Their tactics are unconventional, he stated, the words feeling foreign on his perfectly formed vocalizers. They are not engaging in direct combat. They are merely disrupting. Indeed, Grand Admiral, Vlora confirmed, her multifaceted eyes cycling through a dizzying array of data streams. Their and Apo's, ships and Apo's, are not designed for sustained engagements. They are designed for opportunistic strikes. They are like scavengers, picking at the edges of our formation, exploiting every minor vulnerability. This was precisely the human plan. They couldn't end Apo's win a stand-up fight. Not against the Vexian hegemony. But they could make it expensive. They could make it annoying. And they could make it a logical dot on the ironclad Fury and Apo's, Sparky and Apo's, Finn, a human whose hair seemed to perpetually stand on end from static electricity, was meticulously wiring a series of salvaged Vexian energy cells to a repurposed plasma cannon. All right, Cap, he announced, a wild grin on his face, This baby and Apo's, gonna hit like a drunk asteroid. Might blow out our own power grid. But hey, collateral damage is just part of the fun, right? Kalen gave him a thumbs up. Just make sure it hits something shiny, Sparky. Bonus points for historical landmarks. The Vexians, in their pursuit of efficiency, had developed highly specialized systems. Their shields were optimized against energy weapons, their sensors against conventional stealth. They had no protocols for a ship that suddenly jettisoned its entire cargo bay of volatile, ancient fuel cells directly into their path. or for a vessel that emitted a high-frequency pulse designed to resonate with the specific molecular structure of Vexian hull plating, causing a localized, annoying vibration. End quote. The vibrations are causing structural fatigue in Sector Gamma. End quote. A Vexian engineer reported, his voice tinged with alarm. End quote. It and Opos. S not critical, but it and Opos. S unpleasant. And our diagnostic systems cannot identify the source. End quote. Kalen, watching the Vexian ships twitch and shudder on her tactical display, chuckled. End quote. That and Opos. S just and Opos. The Wobbler and Opos, boys. Old human tech. Designed to shake loose stubborn bolts. Or, in this case, stubborn aliens. End quote. The Vexian fleet, despite its overwhelming power, was losing its composure. Their perfect formations were beginning to fray. Individual star silks, frustrated by the elusive human targets, were breaking ranks, chasing after the most irritating human vessels, only to find themselves ambushed by another, equally absurd tactic. Point one star silk, in a moment of Vexian exasperation, fired a full-power energy lance at the ironclad Fury, a blast that should have vaporized the human ship. But Kalen, anticipating the move, had already ordered Whisper to activate the end quote, emergency scrap shield. End quote. This was a hastily deployed, magnetic field designed to attract any loose metallic debris in the vicinity. The Vexian lance, instead of hitting the ironclad Fury, detonated harmlessly against a swirling cloud of ancient, magnetized space junk. End quote. They are using garbage as a shield. End quote. Xylos and Opos. S voice was now laced with an emotion he couldn't and Opos quite identify. A blend of disbelief and something akin to frustration. End quote. This is not logical. This is not efficient. This is insanity. End quote. End quote. Insanity, Grand Admiral. End quote. Vlora corrected, her voice oddly calm. End quote. Is trying to apply perfect logic to a species that operates on pure, unadulterated chaos. They are not fighting us with our rules. They are fighting us with theirs. End quote. Kalen, watching the Vexian fleet and Opos' increasing disarray, leaned forward, a predatory glint in her eyes. End quote. All right, boys and girls, end quote. She announced over the comms, end quote. Phase 2, the scavenger hunt. Let an Opos' see how they like being the prey for a change, end quote. Phase 2, the scavenger hunt. This wasn't an Opos' about destroying the Vexian fleet outright. That was a pipe dream. This was about bleeding them dry, piece by agonizing piece. It was about turning their overwhelming numbers into a liability, their pristine systems into a buffet of vulnerabilities. The scrap fleet, with its intimate knowledge of Vexian design flaws, gleaned from centuries of dissecting their discarded tech, knew exactly where to hit. End quote. All right, and Opos, Shadow and Opos, you and Opos, re-up, end quote. Kalen barked over the comms. End quote. That star silk on their far flank? The one with the slightly misaligned ventral plating? That and Opos, as your target. Go for the power conduits feeding the aft shields. Dawn and Opos, destroy it. Just tickle it. End quote. Shadow, a human pilot whose ship, the Ghost Whisperer, was a masterwork of salvaged stealth plating and silent thrusters, grinned. End quote. Tickle it, Cap? With pleasure. I and Opos. LL make it sing a lullaby of sparks and despair. End quote. The Ghost Whisperer, a vessel so nondescript it practically vanished against the cosmic background, slipped through the Vexian formation like an oil slick. Its pilot, a master of evasive maneuvers and sensor ghosting, had spent years navigating treacherous asteroid fields and dodging hostile patrols. Vexian sensors, designed to detect large, coherent energy signatures, simply couldn't and Opos get a lock on the Ghost Whisperer and Opos' erratic, low-power profile. Shadow found the target Star Silk, a magnificent vessel that radiated arrogant perfection. With surgical precision, the Ghost Whisperer unleashed a burst of repurposed plasma from a salvaged Vexian cutting tool, designed not for combat, but for dismantling derelicts. The beam sliced through the Star Silk and Opos' ventral plating, precisely where Shadow knew the conduits lay. Alarms blared on the Star Silk and Opos' bridge. End quote. Localized power fluctuations in the aft section. End quote. Screamed a Vexian crewman. End quote. Shields dropping to 60%. Source unknown. End quote. End quote. Unknown. End quote. Scoffed Shadow, pulling the ghost whisperer away. End quote. It was the universe and Opos. S way of saying, and Opos. Hey, your design and Opos. S got a flaw, shiny boy, and Opos. End quote. Grand Admiral Xylos watched the reports with growing alarm. His fleet, designed for overwhelming force, was being nibbled to death by 1,000 tiny, irritating bites. Their star silks were sustaining minor, yet cumulative, damage. Shield generators were flickering, comms arrays were sputtering, and navigation systems were experiencing inexplicable glitches. End quote. They are not engaging our primary weapons. End quote. Vlora observed, her voice now devoid of its usual purr, replaced by a sharp, analytical edge. End quote. They are targeting our subsystems. They are attempting to incapacitate us rather than destroy us. End quote. End quote. But why? End quote. Xylos demanded, his perfect logic struggling. End quote. Such tactics are inefficient. They prolong the conflict. End quote. End quote. Perhaps, end quote, Vlora suggested, a new, unsettling understanding dawning in her multifaceted eyes. End quote. They are not interested in a swift victory. Perhaps they are interested in salvage. End quote. A chilling realization dawned on Xylos. These humans weren't and Opos, fighting for survival in the conventional sense. They were fighting for parts. They were turning the Vexian purification fleet into a giant, mobile junkyard, ripe for the picking on the ironclad Fury. Kalen watched the Vexian ships begin to show signs of wear. A flickering shield here, a sputtering engine there. End quote. They and Opos, restarting to look a little less shiny, Arin and Opos. They whisper? End quote. Whisper, who had been meticulously tracking the Vexian fleet and Opos. Energy signatures, nodded. End quote. They and Opos, re-burning through their reserves, cap. There and Opos, perfection and Opos, ISN and Opos, designed for sustained, illogical chaos. They and Opos, reused to quick, clean kills. We and Opos, re-giving them a slow, messy death by 1,000 paper cuts. End quote. The scrap fleet and Opos. Tactics grew bolder. They deployed, end quote, chaff bombs, end quote, massive clouds of electromagnetically charged scrap that temporarily blinded Vexian sensors. They used repurposed tractor beams to yank smaller Vexian drones off course, then swarmed them, dismantling them for parts mid-battle. They even started broadcasting taunting messages on open comms, crude human jokes and defiant boasts that grated on the Vexian and Opos' perfectly logical sensibilities. End quote. Attention, shiny boys, end quote. Crackled a human voice over the Vexian comms, accompanied by a bizarre, rhythmic thumping sound. End quote. This is Captain and Opos, Mad Dog and Opos, Miller of the Cosmic Rust. Just wanted to let you know, your shields are looking a little flimsy. Might want to get that checked out. Or, just let us have your power core. We and Opos. LL put it to good use. End quote. Xylos slammed a fist on his console, a rare display of raw, unadulterated fury. End quote. This is intolerable. They are mocking us. They are defiling the very concept of warfare. End quote. Vlora, however, was no longer looking at the tactical display. She was looking at the long-range scans, at the sheer, unyielding tenacity of the human, end quote, scrap fleet. End quote. A chilling thought began to form in her mind. End quote. Grand Admiral, end quote, she said, her voice barely a whisper, end quote. They are not just fighting us. They are learning from us. They are adapting, and they are doing it faster than we can comprehend. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, a civilization built on the pillars of logic, efficiency, and predictable outcomes, was facing an enemy that defied all three. The human, end quote, scrap fleet, end quote, wasn't Opos, just disrupting their operations. It was actively dismantling their understanding of warfare. Every Vexian tactical response was met with an unpredictable, often absurd, human counter-tactic. Grand Admiral Xylos, his perfect features now etched with a subtle, almost imperceptible line of stress, watched as another Star Silk reported critical system failures. End quote. Their methods are barbaric, end quote. He declared, the word tasting like grit in his vocalizers. End quote. They are not fighting with honor. They are fighting with opportunism, end quote. End quote. Indeed, Grand Admiral, end quote. Vlora stated, her voice flat. End quote. They are exploiting every perceived weakness, every design flaw. They are using our own discarded technology against us, but in ways that violate every known principle of Vexian engineering. End quote. This was the core of humanity and Opos' advantage. While the Vexians meticulously crafted each component for optimal performance within a closed system, humans had a knack for taking disparate parts and forcing them to work together, often in ways their original designers never intended. They were the ultimate improvisers, the masters of the end quote, good enough end quote, solution that somehow, miraculously, worked on the ironclad Fury. Kalen was overseeing the transfer of a newly acquired Vexian shield emitter. It was a prototype, discarded by the hegemony for being, end quote, too unstable, end quote, for mass production. For humans, end quote, unstable, end quote, simply meant, end quote, exciting, end quote, end quote. All right, whisper, end quote, Kalen said, end quote, let an Opos. Let's see if we can get this bad boy to play nice with our old K and Opos, their power core. What an Opos? That's the worst that could happen. We blow ourselves up? Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, end quote. Whisper, humming a tuneless human ditty, was already connecting a tangle of mismatched wires. End quote. Worst? We become a supernova. Best. We get a shield that makes their star silks look like tin cans. End quote. The Vexian fleet, despite its numerical superiority, was slowly being picked apart. Their star silks, once gleaming symbols of perfection, were now scarred, dented, and sputtering. Their advanced sensors, designed to detect complex energy signatures, were being overwhelmed by the sheer electromagnetic noise generated by the human fleet and Opos' jury-rigged systems. End quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. A Vexian comms officer reported, his voice tinged with desperation, end quote. The human vessel and Opos, the screaming comet and Opos, is broadcasting a high-frequency pulse that is interfering with our targeting arrays. We cannot get a lock, end quote. Xylos clenched a fist, end quote. A high-frequency pulse? What is its origin? End quote. End quote. It appears to be an amplified, distorted recording of a human vocalization, Grand Admiral, end quote. Vlora replied, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. End quote. They refer to it as and Opos, heavy metal music, and Opos. It is designed to cause maximum auditory and systemic disruption. End quote. Kalen, listening to the Vexian comms chatter, thanks to a repurposed Vexian comms interceptor, laughed. End quote. Heavy metal boys. The universal language of and Opos, screw you, and Opos, end quote. The Vexian fleet, now visibly disoriented, began to make mistakes. Their formations, once flawless, became ragged. Individual captains, frustrated by the relentless, illogical assault, began to act independently, breaking the hegemony and Opos' strict protocols. This was exactly what the humans wanted. End quote. They and Opos, re-cracking, end quote. Kalen observed, a predatory smile spreading across her face. End quote. Their perfect little logic circuits are shorting out. They can and Opos handle the messy reality of US, end quote. Then, a bold move. The ironclad Fury, along with a handful of other heavily armed human vessels, launched a coordinated strike directly at a Vexian supply vessel, a massive, unarmed freighter laden with spare parts and fuel. The Vexians, focused on the main fleet, were caught off guard. End quote. They are targeting a non-combatant vessel, end quote. Xylos roared, his voice finally betraying genuine outrage. End quote. This is an act of piracy, a violation of all galactic conventions, end quote. Kalen, watching the supply vessel and Opos' shields buckle under the combined fire of the scrap fleet, merely shrugged. End quote. Conventions? We and Opos, too busy surviving to read the rulebook, shiny. Besides, what and Opos? Yours is ours now. Consider it a down payment on your empire. End quote. The capture of the Vexian supply vessel was a turning point. It was and Opos, just about the parts. It was about the psychological blow. The Vexians, who had always seen themselves as the pinnacle of galactic order, were being robbed blind by a species they considered beneath contempt. The humiliation was palpable. The capture of the Vexian supply vessel sent a ripple of disbelief through the hegemony fleet. It was an act so audacious, so utterly illogical, that it shattered their rigid understanding of warfare. Grand Admiral Xylos, for the first time in his perfectly ordered existence, felt a tremor of uncertainty. End quote. They have stolen our supplies. End quote. He articulated, the words tasting like ash. End quote. They have violated protocol. They have acted without honor. End quote. End quote. Honor is a luxury, Grand Admiral. End quote. Vlora stated, her voice now devoid of its usual purr, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. End quote. Survival is a necessity. And these humans, they are masters of necessity. End quote. The stolen Vexian supplies were a godsend for the scrap fleet. Fuel cells, spare parts, even advanced Vexian diagnostic tools. All were immediately put to use, not in their intended manner, but in ways that only human ingenuity could conceive. The ironclad Fury now boasted a jury-rigged Vexian shield array, its energy signature a chaotic, unpredictable mess that baffled Vexian sensors. End quote. All right, boys and girls, end quote. Kaylin announced over the comms, a triumphant grin on her face. End quote. We and Oppos, VE got new toys. Let and Oppos, see what kind of trouble we can get into with these shiny bits. End quote. The Vexian fleet, meanwhile, was beginning to show signs of internal strain. Their strict adherence to protocol, once their greatest strength, was now their biggest weakness. Individual captains, frustrated by the endless, illogical skirmishes, were starting to make independent decisions, leading to confusion and friendly fire incidents. End quote. Commander Xylos, end quote. A Vexian bridge officer reported, his voice trembling. End quote. 2 of our Star Silks have collided while attempting to evade a human and Oppos, chaff bomb and Oppos. Casualties are significant. End quote. Xylos felt a surge of cold fury. Collisions? In his perfectly ordered fleet? This was an abomination. The humans, sensing the Vexian disarray, pressed their advantage. They launched, end quote, decoy fleets, end quote, clusters of salvaged, inert debris rigged with powerful, but harmless, energy signatures designed to mimic Vexian vessels. The Vexians, unable to distinguish between real threats and elaborate junk, wasted precious energy and time chasing ghosts. End quote. They are using illusions, end quote, Vlora observed, her voice tinged with a new, unsettling respect. End quote. They are manipulating our perceptions. They are fighting us not just with kinetic force, but with deception. End quote. End quote. Deception is dishonorable. End quote. Xylos roared. End quote. And effective. End quote. Vlora countered, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. End quote. Their and Oppos, scrap fleet and Oppos, is growing. Every Vexian drone they disable, every scout ship they capture, becomes another piece in their chaotic arsenal. End quote. Indeed, the humans were not just fighting. They were cannibalizing the Vexian fleet. Disabled Star Silks were quickly boarded by human salvage crews, their valuable components stripped clean before the Vexians could send recovery teams. It was a macabre, yet highly effective, form of battlefield recycling. On the ironclad Fury, Whisper was practically vibrating with excitement. End quote. Cap, we just pulled a fully intact Vexian warp core from that last derelict. It and Oppos, unstable as all hell, but if we can get it rigged up to the main power grid, end quote. Kaylin and Oppos, eyes gleamed. End quote. Then we give them a taste of their own medicine. Whisper. A really, really big taste. End quote. The Vexian High Command, observing the escalating chaos, began to question Xylos and Oppos' strategy. The end quote. Purification fleet, end quote, once a symbol of Vexian might, was becoming a galactic embarrassment. Reports of human audacity and Vexian disarray were beginning to leak to other species, threatening the hegemony and Oppos' carefully cultivated image of invincibility, end quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. A high-ranking Vexian counselor and Oppos' hologram flickered onto Xylos and Oppos' bridge, his voice laced with thinly veiled disapproval. End quote. The projected energy expenditure for this and Oppos, cleansing and Oppos, operation is escalating beyond acceptable parameters. Furthermore, the unconventional nature of the conflict is causing considerable unrest in the outer sectors. End quote. Xylos, his perfect composure finally cracking, slammed his fist on the console. End quote. They are not fighting by the rules. They are not a civilized enemy. They are vermin. End quote. End quote. Vermin, Grand Admiral, end quote. The counselor retorted, end quote, who are currently dismantling your fleet piece by piece. Perhaps it is time to reassess our understanding of what constitutes A and Oppos, civilized and Oppos, enemy. Or, perhaps, to reassess our understanding of and Oppos, vermin and Oppos, who can turn our own perfection into their scrap. End quote. The implication hung heavy in the air. The Vexian hegemony, for the first time, was not just facing resistance. It was facing an existential challenge to its very worldview. And it was coming from the species they had dismissed as mere cosmic dust. The Vexian hegemony and Oppos' perfect facade was crumbling. The end quote, purification fleet, end quote, once an unstoppable force, was now a symbol of their growing humiliation. Grand Admiral Xylos, his logical mind struggling to reconcile the chaos with his ordered universe, felt a new, unsettling emotion, frustration, end quote. Their tactics are illogical, end quote. He repeated the words a desperate mantra, end quote. They are not adhering to any known combat doctrine. They are simply reacting, end quote, and adapting, Grand Admiral, end quote. Vlora interjected, her voice now dangerously calm, end quote. They are learning our systems, our protocols, our weaknesses. They are using our own discarded knowledge against us. They are turning our perfection into their weapon. End quote. This was the terrifying truth. Humans, with their centuries of scavenging Vexian derelicts, had amassed a vast, informal database of Vexian technology. They knew the schematics, the energy signatures, the stress points. They knew how to make a Vexian shield generator sing a different tune, how to make a Vexian comms array broadcast static, and how to make a Vexian warp core hum with an unstable, terrifying power out on the ironclad Fury. Whisper was meticulously fine-tuning the salvaged Vexian warp core. It pulsed with an ominous, violet glow, radiating immense power. End quote. All right, Cap, end quote. Whisper announced, wiping sweat from their brow. End quote. She and Oppos, purring like a kitten that could tear a hole in space-time if you look at it funny, end quote. Kalen grinned. End quote. Perfect. We and Oppos, about to give Xylos a lesson in and Oppos, looking at it funny, and Oppos, end quote. The Vexian fleet, now visibly demoralized, continued to lose ships. Not to direct destruction, but to crippling system failures. A Starsilk would suddenly lose shield power in one quadrant, or its engines would sputter, leaving it vulnerable to human boarding parties who would strip it clean before the Vexians could react. End quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. A Vexian officer reported, his voice laced with despair, end quote. The human vessel and Oppos, the cosmic kettle and Oppos, has just disabled the primary navigation array of the Starsilk and Oppos, Radiant Dawn and Oppos, by firing a concentrated beam of what appears to be highly corrosive, recycled coolant, end quote. Xylos stared, speechless. Recycled coolant? As a weapon? This was beyond comprehension. The humans were not just fighting. They were innovating at a terrifying pace. Every Vexian mistake, every discarded piece of technology, became a new opportunity for human ingenuity. They were a species that had learned to thrive on scarcity, to turn disadvantage into advantage, to find beauty in the broken and power in the discarded. End quote. They are like a plague, end quote. Xylos whispered, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes. End quote. A plague of resourcefulness, end quote. The Vexian High Command, now in full panic, issued new orders, a general retreat from the human sector. The end quote, purification fleet, end quote, was to disengage and return to hegemony space for reevaluation. The mission, once deemed a simple cleansing, had become a costly, humiliating quagmire, end quote. They are retreating, Cap, end quote. Whisper exclaimed, pointing at the tactical display. End quote. They and Oppos. Actually running. End quote. Kalen watched the Vexian ships, once so arrogant, now scrambling back into the void. A grim satisfaction settled over her. End quote. Running? Oh no, whisper. They and Oppos. Just giving us more scrap to chase. End quote. Then came the final, audacious move. As the Vexian flagship, the Purity and Oppos' edge, began its retreat, the ironclad Fury and a handful of other human ships, powered by their newly acquired and highly unstable Vexian warp cores, made an impossible jump. They materialized not behind the retreating fleet, but ahead of it, directly in the path of the Purity and Oppos' edge. End quote. Impossible. End quote. Xylos roared, his perfect composure shattering completely. End quote. They cannot possess such warp technology. It is beyond their capabilities. End quote. End quote. Oh, we can possess it, shiny. End quote. Kalen and Oppos' voice crackled over the open comms, her face grimly determined. End quote. We just had to borrow it from you. And now, Grand Admiral, you and Oppos, going to pay the salvage fee. End quote. The ironclad Fury, now bristling with repurposed Vexian weaponry, opened fire. Not with a sustained barrage, but with a series of surgical, precise strikes, targeting the Purity and Oppos' edge and Oppos' command bridge, its main engines, and its primary shield generators. The Vexians, caught completely off guard, were unable to react. Xylos, watching his bridge explode around him, felt a chilling realization. These humans hadn't and Oppos. He just learned from his technology. They had learned his tactics. They had learned his weaknesses. And they had turned them into their own, chaotic, glorious strength. The sudden, impossible appearance of the human end quote, scrap fleet end quote, directly in the retreat path of the Purity and Oppos' edge sent shockwaves through the Vexian command structure. It was a move of such audacious precision, such illogical daring, that it broke every Vexian tactical doctrine. Grand Admiral Xylos, his perfect world shattering around him, watched in horror as his flagship, the epitome of Vexian perfection, was systematically dismantled by the very end quote, vermin end quote, he had sought to cleanse. End quote. They used our own warp core against us. End quote. Xylos shrieked, a sound unheard from a Vexian in millennia. End quote. How could they calibrate it so precisely? It is unstable. It should have torn them apart. End quote. End quote. Perhaps, Grand Admiral. End quote. Vlora stated, her voice now a chilling monotone. End quote. Their definition of and Oppos, unstable and Oppos, is merely our definition of and Oppos, uncontrolled power. And Oppos, they have a knack for wrangling chaos. End quote. Indeed, Whisper had spent agonizing hours coaxing the salvaged Vexian warp core into a semblance of stability, pushing it far beyond its safety parameters. It had been a gamble, a desperate, human gamble, but it had paid off. The ironclad Fury was a ticking time bomb, but it was a time bomb aimed squarely at the heart of Vexian arrogance. The Purity and Oppos' edge, once an impenetrable fortress, was now a crippled behemoth. Its shields flickered, its engines sputtered, and its comms arrays screamed static. The human ships, like a pack of vultures, swarmed around it, picking off vital systems with ruthless efficiency. End quote. They are targeting the main bridge. End quote. A Vexian officer cried, as a repurposed Vexian energy lance, now painted with crude human graffiti, slammed into the Purity and Oppos' edge and Oppos' command center. Xylos felt the deck shudder violently. He saw Vlora, her multifaceted eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization, before the world dissolved into a blinding flash of light and the scream of tearing metal on the ironclad Fury. Kalen watched the Purity and Oppos' edge break apart, a silent, grim satisfaction settling over her. End quote. Well, end quote, she muttered, end quote, that and Oppos' one less shiny thing to worry about. End quote. The remaining Vexian fleet, witnessing the destruction of their flagship and the apparent demise of their Grand Admiral, broke completely. Order dissolved into panicked flight. Star Silks scattered in every direction, abandoning their formations, their protocols, and their mission. The end quote. purification fleet, had become a rout, They and Oppos, reef fleeing cap, whisper cheered, a wild, joyful laugh escaping them, They and Oppos, running with their tails between their legs, Kalen nodded, but her eyes were already scanning the retreating Vexian ships, Let them run. We and Oppos, VE made our point. But we and Oppos, not done yet. We and Oppos, VE got a lot of new scrap to collect, The scrap fleet, no longer just defending their territory, became the hunters. They pursued the fleeing Vexian vessels, not with the intent of total annihilation, but with the ruthless efficiency of cosmic scavengers. Disabled star silks were boarded, their valuable components stripped, their databanks plundered. The Vexian hegemony and Oppos' advanced technology, once a symbol of their superiority, was now being repurposed, rewired, and redefined by the very species they had sought to erase. Word of the Vexian defeat spread like wildfire through the galaxy. The primitive humans, the cosmic parasites, had not only repelled the mighty purification fleet, but had turned its own perfection against it. Other species, long oppressed by the hegemony, watched with a mixture of awe and dawning hope. Back in hegemony space, the remaining Vexian high command was in disarray. The loss of Xylos, the destruction of the purity and Oppos' edge, and the utter humiliation of their fleet had shattered their perfect logic. This is unprecedented, A Vexian counselor stammered, his voice trembling. They are not a species to be cleansed. They are a force to be reckoned with. Vlora, who had miraculously survived the destruction of the purity and Oppos' edge by activating a prototype escape pod at the last second, stood before the council, her multifaceted eyes now holding a chilling, newfound understanding. They are not just a force, counselors. They are a mirror. They reflect our own discarded potential, our own forgotten ingenuity. We built our perfection on rigid logic. They built their survival on embracing the chaos we discarded. She paused, then added, her voice a low, resonant thrum that was strangely devoid of its usual purr. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets just scrapped an empire. The aftermath of the rust bucket rodeo reverberated across the galaxy. The Vexian hegemony, once an unassailable bastion of order and perfection, was now a fractured entity, its reputation in tatters. The image of the gleaming star silks being systematically cannibalized by human scrap ships became a potent symbol of defiance for every species that had ever chafed under Vexian rule. Grand Admiral Xylos was officially declared lost in action, a polite fiction to mask the utter collapse of his perfect command. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, became an unlikely and deeply unsettling voice of reason within the shattered hegemony. She had seen the raw, unpolished power of humanity firsthand, and it had fundamentally altered her logical framework. Their strength, Vlora explained to a bewildered Vexian High Council, her multifaceted eyes projecting a holographic replay of the ironclad fury and Oppos' audacious warp jump, lies not in superior technology, but in superior adaptability. We built our systems to be perfect. They built theirs to be resilient. When our perfection failed, we had no contingency. When their and Oppos' imperfection and Oppos' failed, they simply reconfigured. The Vexian counselors, beings of pure logic, struggled to comprehend. But their methods are chaotic, illogical. How can chaos be a strength? Vlora inclined her head, a gesture she had subtly picked up from observing Kalen. Chaos, counselors, is merely order we do not yet understand. The humans do not fear it. They embrace it. They turn it into a weapon. Meanwhile, in the human sector, the scrap fleet was celebrating. Not with grand ceremonies or elaborate parades, but with raucous laughter, shared stories of impossible escapes, and the clanking of wrenches against newly acquired Vexian tech. The ironclad Fury was now a truly bizarre sight, its patchwork hull augmented with gleaming Vexian plating, its engines humming with a strange, hybrid power. End quote. Whisper, end quote. Kalen said, watching her crew meticulously dismantle a captured Vexian comms array. End quote. You think we could get this thing to broadcast and Oppos, Sweet Home Alabama and Oppos, across the entire hegemony? End quote. Whisper, already tinkering with the Vexian circuits, grinned. End quote. Give me an hour, Cap. And maybe a bigger amplifier. We and Oppos, LL make sure they never forget us. End quote. The victory had fundamentally changed humanity and Oppos' standing in the galaxy. No longer were they seen as cosmic parasites. They were the end quote, scrap lords, end quote, the end quote, chaos engineers, end quote, the species that had taken on the unassailable hegemony and turned its own perfection into scrap. Other species, emboldened by humanity and Oppos' audacity, began to look at their own discarded tech with new eyes, wondering what hidden potential lay within. The Vexian hegemony, in a desperate attempt to regain control, tried to launch punitive strikes, but each attempt was met with the same unpredictable, infuriating human response. Their supply lines were harassed, their scout ships vanished, and their new, end quote, perfect, end quote, prototypes mysteriously suffered, end quote, unforeseen systemic failures, end quote, after encountering human vessels, end quote. They are infecting our systems, end quote. A Vexian scientist shrieked, examining a corrupted data chip salvaged from a disabled Star Silk, end quote. Their and Oppos, scrap and Oppos, is somehow contaminating our pristine code, end quote. It wasn't Oppos, contamination, it was human ingenuity. Humans had learned to exploit the subtle vulnerabilities in Vexian encryption to plant, end quote, logic bombs, end quote, disguised as harmless data packets, and to introduce tiny, almost imperceptible flaws into Vexian systems that would only manifest under specific, chaotic conditions. Kalen, watching the Vexian hegemony slowly unravel, felt a strange mix of triumph and weariness. End quote. They built their empire on control, whisper, end quote, she mused. End quote. But the universe ISN and Oppos, controllable. It and Oppos, messy. And we and Oppos, just better at living in the mess, end quote. The galaxy was changing. The Vexian hegemony, once the undisputed masters of order, was now struggling to maintain its own internal coherence. And humanity, the species they had dismissed as irrelevant, was now poised to become a new, unpredictable force in the cosmos, a testament to the power of a wrench, a roll of duct tape, and an unyielding refusal to know when to quit. The universe had laughed at their rust buckets. Now, the universe was about to learn that those rust buckets had teeth. The Vexian hegemony and Oppos' retreat was not a strategic withdrawal. It was a panic flight. The end quote, purification fleet, end quote, once a symbol of their unyielding power, was now a scattered, demoralized shadow of its former self. Grand Admiral Xylos and Oppos' fate remained officially, end quote, undetermined, end quote, but the whispers throughout the hegemony spoke of a complete mental collapse, a mind shattered by the illogical, chaotic reality of human warfare. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, had undergone a profound transformation. She had witnessed humanity and Oppos' raw, unbridled adaptability, and it had opened her multifaceted eyes to a universe far more complex than her perfect Vexian logic had ever allowed. She became the hegemony and Oppos' reluctant expert on, end quote, humanity, end quote, a role she approached with a chilling, analytical fascination, end quote. Their and Oppos, scrap and Oppos, is not merely salvaged material, counselors, end quote, Vlora explained to a stunned Vexian High Council. End quote, it is a philosophy. It is a testament to their ability to find utility in everything, to adapt, to improvise, and to turn perceived weakness into unexpected strength, end quote. The Vexian counselors, still reeling from the humiliation, struggled to grasp this alien concept, end quote. But their vessels are unsightly, inefficient. They are not aesthetically pleasing, end quote. Vlora merely inclined her head, end quote. Aesthetics, counselors, are irrelevant when one and Oppos' survival is at stake. The humans have proven that and Oppos, ugly and Oppos, can be terrifyingly effective, end quote. Back in the human sector, the scrap fleet was undergoing its own evolution. The victory against the Vexians had injected a new level of confidence, and more importantly, a wealth of new, high-tech components. The ironclad Fury, once a testament to cobbled-together survival, was now a formidable, if still visually chaotic, warship. Its Vexian-augmented shields hummed with a deep, powerful resonance, and its repurposed energy lances now fired with a terrifying precision. End quote. All right, whisper, end quote. Kalen said, watching a newly installed Vexian targeting array cycle through its diagnostics. End quote. Let an Oppos. Let's see if we can get this thing to lock onto a Hegemony-class asteroid. Just for practice. End quote. Whisper, their face alight with the thrill of new tech, nodded eagerly. End quote. Consider it done, Cap. We and Oppos, LL make that asteroid regret its existence. End quote. The galaxy, meanwhile, was buzzing with the news. The end quote. Scrap Lords end quote, had not only defeated the Vexians but had done so by turning the Hegemony and Oppos' own perfection against them. This audacious victory resonated deeply with other species, particularly those who had long suffered under the Vexian yoke. Emissaries from various oppressed worlds began to arrive in the human sector, cautiously seeking alliances, offering resources, and, most importantly, asking for, end quote, lessons in scrap, end quote. End quote. They want us to teach them how to fight like us? End quote. Kalen mused, looking at a holographic projection of a delegation from the insectoid K and Oppos, Thar, a species known for their rigid military structure. End quote. They want to learn how to duct tape a galaxy together? End quote. End quote. Apparently, Cap, end quote. Whisper replied, a smirk playing on their lips. End quote. Turns out, chaos is contagious. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, in a desperate attempt to regain its prestige, launched a propaganda campaign, dismissing the human victory as a, end quote, fluke, end quote, an, end quote, anomaly, end quote. But the images of crippled star silks and the stories of human audacity had already spread too far. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, end quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. A Vexian comms officer reported to a new, visibly shaken Xylos, who had been found alive, but in a state of profound psychological trauma, end quote. Reports indicate widespread unrest in the outer sectors. Several client species are openly defying hegemony directives, citing the Oppos, human example, Oppos, end quote. Xylos, his eyes vacant, merely muttered, end quote. The scrap, it spreads, end quote. Vlora, however, saw the bigger picture, end quote. The humans have not just defeated us in battle, Grand Admiral. They have defeated our ideology. They have shown the galaxy that perfection is a fragile illusion, and that true strength lies in the ability to adapt, to improvise, and to embrace the beautiful, messy reality of existence, end quote. The Vexian hegemony, once a monolithic power, was beginning to fracture from within. Its rigid adherence to logic and perfection had left it brittle, unable to bend without breaking. And the humans, the ultimate cosmic improvisers, were more than happy to provide the hammer. The galaxy was about to get a lot more interesting and a lot less shiny. The galaxy, once a neatly ordered dominion under the iron fist of the Vexian hegemony, was now a vibrant, unpredictable tapestry woven with threads of human defiance. The end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo end quote, wasn't Oppos, just a battle, it was a revolution. The humans, once cosmic pariahs, were now accidental liberators, their chaotic victory echoing through the void, inspiring countless oppressed species to cast off their Vexian chains. Grand Admiral Xylos, a broken shell of his former self, was confined to a secure, high-logic facility, his mind forever fractured by the sheer illogicality of human warfare. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, found herself elevated to an uncomfortable position of influence within the hegemony, her insights into human, end quote, chaos, end quote, now deemed invaluable, if deeply unsettling, end quote. They are not merely a military threat, counselors, end quote, Vlora reiterated, her voice now carrying a strange, almost human inflection, end quote. They are a cultural contagion. Their philosophy of and Oppos, scrap and adapt and Oppos, is spreading, undermining the very foundations of Vexian order." End quote. The Vexian High Council, desperate to staunch the bleeding, attempted to reassert control through overwhelming force, but their efforts were met with increasingly sophisticated and bewildering human countermeasures. The scrap fleet, now augmented by salvaged Vexian tech and bolstered by new, eager allies, was a force to be reckoned with. On the ironclad Fury, Kalen was reviewing new intelligence reports. End quote. "All right, Whisper," end quote, she said, tapping a holographic display of a Vexian orbital defense platform. End quote. "The K and Opos, their scouts say their primary shield generator has a hidden exhaust port. Think we can get into Opos, Sparky and Opos, to rig up something creative?" End quote. Whisper, already sketching out schematics on a greasy datapad, grinned. End quote. "Creative? Cap, Sparky and Opos, idea of and Opos, creative and Opos, involves a lot of explosions and questionable structural integrity. I think he and Opos, LL be right at home." End quote. The human approach to warfare was evolving. They weren't and Opos, just scavenging. They were innovating. They were taking Vexian technology, stripping it down to its bare essentials, and then rebuilding it with a human twist, often making it more robust, more versatile, and infinitely more unpredictable. A Vexian energy lance, designed for surgical precision, became a wide-area dispersal weapon. A Vexian sensor array, built for subtle detection, became a jamming device capable of blinding entire fleets. End quote. "Their modifications are blasphemous." End quote. A Vexian engineer wailed, examining a captured human-modified Vexian drone. End quote. "They have taken our perfect designs and defiled them. It and Opos. An abomination." End quote. Kalen, hearing the intercepted comms, just chuckled. End quote. "Abomination? Nah, shiny. We just made it better. More fun, anyway." End quote. The Vexian hegemony and Opos' grip on the galaxy was loosening. Client species, emboldened by human victories, began to openly rebel. Small, independent fleets, inspired by the end quote, scrap lords, end quote, started harassing Vexian trade routes and liberating contested territories. The hegemony, once a single, unified entity, was now fighting 1,000 small, frustrating wars on every front. End quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. A Vexian officer reported to a new, visibly stressed Xylo's replacement, end quote. "The human-backed rebellion on Xylo's Prime is escalating. They are using improvised orbital defenses constructed from salvaged Vexian debris. Our bombardments are proving ineffective." End quote. The new Xylos, a being of rigid protocol, felt a cold dread. End quote. "Improvised? How can improvised defenses withstand our orbital bombardment?" End quote. Vlora, observing from the side, offered a chilling explanation. End quote. "Because, Grand Admiral, they are not designed to withstand. They are designed to adapt. They shift, they reconfigure, they absorb and redirect our energy in ways our predictive models cannot comprehend. They are like a living, breathing shield of chaos." End quote. The Vexian hegemony, once the undisputed masters of the galaxy, found themselves in an impossible position. They were fighting an enemy that refused to play by their rules, an enemy that thrived on the very chaos they abhorred. Their vast, perfect military machine was being slowly, painstakingly ground down by a species that knew how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a weapon. Kalen, standing on the bridge of the ironclad Fury, now a true flagship of a burgeoning, chaotic human-led alliance, looked out at the stars. End quote. "They thought they could sweep us away, Whisper, end quote," she said, her voice low. End quote. "They thought we were just dust. Turns out, dust can clog up a lot of very expensive machinery." End quote. The galaxy was no longer perfect. It was messy, unpredictable, and gloriously, defiantly human. And for the first time in a long time, it felt alive. The Vexian hegemony and Opos' once unyielding grip on the galaxy had not just loosened, it had shattered into a million glittering fragments. The end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo end quote, had ignited a wildfire of rebellion, and humanity, the cosmic underdog, found itself at the unlikely forefront of a galactic uprising. Grand Admiral Xylos remained a cautionary tale, a living testament to the dangers of underestimating a species that thrived on chaos. Strategist Prime Vlora, now a reluctant, yet respected, voice within the fractured hegemony, continued to analyze the human anomaly, with a mix of dread and grudging admiration, Their influence is expanding exponentially, counselors, Vlora reported, her voice devoid of its usual purr, replaced by a sharp, almost urgent tone. They are not conquering territories, they are inspiring them. There and oppos, scrap and adapt and oppos. Philosophy is becoming a rallying cry for every species that has ever felt the boot of Vexian perfection. The Vexian High Council, desperate and disoriented, grasped at straws. But how do we fight an enemy that has no discernible pattern, that refuses to adhere to logical combat doctrine? Vlora and Oppos' multifaceted eyes seem to dim. You do not. You learn, or you perish. Meanwhile, the human-led alliance, a motley collection of species united by their shared disdain for Vexian perfection, was growing. The K and Oppos, the R, with their rigid military discipline, found themselves learning the art of improvised chaos from human mentors. The crystalline Xylosians, known for their intricate energy manipulation, were taught how to overclock their systems beyond safe parameters for maximum, if temporary, effect on the ironclad Fury, now truly a flagship of a burgeoning galactic movement. Kalen watched the new allies train. See whisper? She said, gesturing to a K and Oppos, their battlecruiser attempting a human-style debris ram maneuver. They and Oppos, re-getting the hang of it. Turns out, everyone likes a good explosion. Whisper, who had become the de facto chief engineer for the entire alliance, was beaming. And everyone loves a good piece of salvaged tech. Cap. We and Oppos, practically running a galactic recycling program now. The Vexian hegemony, once so proud of its technological superiority, found its own innovations turned against it. Human-modified Vexian weaponry, Vexian-designed stealth systems repurposed for audacious raids, and Vexian communication networks hijacked for propaganda broadcasts. It was a constant, humiliating assault. They are using our own designs against us. A Vexian engineer shrieked, examining a captured human-modified Starsilk drone. They have improved upon our perfection. It is an insult. Kalen, listening to the intercepted comms, just grinned. Insult? Nah, shiny. It and Oppos, called and Oppos, paying it forward. And Oppos, you gave us the blueprints. We just added a little human flair. The Vexian hegemony and Oppos' internal cohesion began to unravel. Their rigid caste system, their emphasis on flawless execution, and their inability to tolerate imperfection were proving to be fatal flaws. When faced with an enemy that thrived on imperfection, their own society began to crack under the strain. Grand Admiral, a Vexian officer reported to the new, increasingly desperate Xylos replacement, Reports of internal dissent are escalating. Our own citizens are questioning the hegemony and Oppos' ability to maintain order. They are disillusioned. The new Xylos, his perfect features now etched with lines of genuine fear, could only stare at the tactical display, which showed a galaxy in open revolt. Disillusioned? But we offered them perfection. We offered them order. Vlora, observing from the side, offered a grim truth. And they have seen, Grand Admiral, that perfection is a cage. The humans have offered them freedom. And the universe, it seems, prefers chaos to a gilded cage. The final confrontation was not a single, epic battle, but a slow, grinding war of attrition. The Vexian hegemony, once so vast, found its borders shrinking, its resources dwindling, and its morale shattered. They were fighting an enemy that refused to be defeated, an enemy that simply adapted to every new challenge, turning every setback into an opportunity. Kalen, standing on the bridge of the ironclad Fury, now a symbol of galactic defiance, watched as the last remnants of the Vexian fleet retreated into their core systems, broken and defeated. They thought they could sweep us away, end quote, she said, her voice low, a hint of weariness but also immense pride. End quote. They thought we were just dust. Turns out, dust can build an empire of its own. End quote. The galaxy was no longer perfect. It was messy, unpredictable, and gloriously, defiantly human. And for the first time in a long time, it was truly free. The Vexians had learned, too late, that the universe doesn't and oppose care about perfection. It cares about survival. And humanity, with its rust buckets and its endless ingenuity, was the ultimate survivor. The remnants of the Vexian hegemony, once the undisputed masters of galactic order, had retreated into their core systems, a shattered empire licking its wounds. The end quote, rust bucket rodeo end quote, had not only defeated them militarily but had fundamentally dismantled their philosophical foundations. Grand Admiral Xylos remained a cautionary tale, a symbol of the hegemony and oppos, hubris. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, became an unlikely, yet crucial, bridge between the old order and the new, her understanding of humanity proving indispensable. End quote. They are not conquerors, counselors, end quote. Vlora explained to the few remaining Vexian High Council members, her voice now carrying a strange, almost empathetic resonance. End quote. They are catalysts. They have shown the galaxy that true strength lies not in rigid control, but in fluid adaptation. They have taught the universe to embrace its own imperfections. End quote. The Vexian counselors, their perfect features marred by lines of fatigue and despair, could only stare at the holographic maps, which showed a galaxy in open celebration. A galaxy where the human, end quote, scrap fleet, end quote, was no longer a joke, but a legend. Meanwhile, the human-led alliance was busy rebuilding. The liberated sectors, once stripped bare by Vexian efficiency, were now bustling hubs of innovation and collaboration. Human engineers worked alongside K and Oppos, their strategists, Xylosian energy manipulators, and a myriad of other species, all united by a shared vision of a galaxy built on cooperation, not conquest. On the ironclad Fury. Now a revered relic and training vessel, Kalen watched a new generation of human and allied pilots practice their, end quote, scrap and adapt, end quote, maneuvers, end quote. Remember, kids, end quote, she lectured, her voice gruff but warm, end quote. There and oppos, no such thing as a and oppos, broken and oppos, part. Only a part that has and oppos, found its true calling yet, end quote. Whisper, now overseeing a vast network of salvage operations and tech-sharing initiatives, was thriving. End quote. We and oppos, we're not just building ships anymore, Cap, end quote, they said, a wide grin on their face. End quote. We and oppos, rebuilding a new galaxy. One piece of scrap at a time. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, in its isolation, struggled to comprehend its defeat. Their perfect systems, designed for an orderly universe, failed to cope with the messy reality of a galaxy that was now embracing chaos. Their internal dissent grew, their resources dwindled, and their once unblemished image was forever tarnished. End quote. They have infected us with their irrationality, end quote. A Vexian scientist lamented, observing a growing trend of, end quote, creative problem-solving, end quote, among his own species, a concept once anathema to Vexian logic. Kalen, listening to the intercepted comms, just shook her head. End quote. Irrationality? Nah, shiny. That and oppos. Just called and oppos, thinking outside the box. And oppos, you guys should try it sometime. End quote. The galaxy, once defined by Vexian perfection, was now a vibrant, diverse tapestry of cultures and technologies. The human, end quote, scrap fleet, end quote, had become the backbone of a new galactic peacekeeping force, their rust buckets now symbols of freedom and ingenuity. They patrolled the trade routes, intervened in conflicts with their unique brand of, end quote, chaotic diplomacy, end quote, and continued to salvage and repurpose everything they could get their hands on, end quote. Grand Admiral, end quote. Vlora reported to the new figurehead Xylos, her voice tinged with a strange, almost wistful quality, end quote. The humans have established A and Oppos, Galactic Salvage Exchange, and Oppos. They're openly trading and sharing technology with all species, even those who once served the hegemony. They are building bridges, end quote. The figurehead Xylos, his mind still struggling with the concept of, end quote, bridges, end quote, that wherein and oppos, perfectly symmetrical, merely stared blankly. Vlora's side. End quote. They have shown us, Grand Admiral, that true strength is not in control, but in collaboration, not in perfection, but in resilience, not in order, but in the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of existence. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, once a beacon of unyielding order, slowly faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered across the stars. And humanity, with its rust buckets and its stubborn, audacious spirit, rose to become an unexpected, yet beloved, force in the cosmos. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Vexian hegemony, a shadow of its former glory, continued its slow, inevitable decline. Its rigid adherence to perfection had left it brittle, unable to adapt to the chaotic, unpredictable galaxy that humanity had helped to forge. Grand Admiral Xylos, a tragic figure, remained a stark reminder of the cost of hubris. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, became a pivotal, if controversial, figure within the dwindling Vexian leadership, advocating for a radical shift in philosophy. End quote. We must learn from them, counselors. End quote. Vlora pleaded with the remaining Vexian High Council, her voice resonating with a newfound urgency. End quote. We must embrace the and-oppos, imperfection. And-oppos. We must learn to salvage, to adapt, to improvise. Our very survival depends on it. End quote. The counselors, steeped in millennia of Vexian dogma, recoiled. End quote. Embrace imperfection? That is anathema to our very being. We are the embodiment of order. End quote. Vlora merely shook her head. End quote. And that order, counselors, has led us to the brink of extinction. The humans, with their and-oppos, rust buckets, and oppos, have shown us a different path. A path of resilience, of ingenuity, of life. End quote. Meanwhile, the human-led Galactic Salvage Exchange flourished. It was more than just a trade network. It was a vibrant community where species shared knowledge, resources, and, most importantly, their unique approaches to problem-solving. Human engineers, known for their end quote, outside-the-box end quote, thinking, were in high demand, helping other species repurpose ancient tech and develop innovative solutions to long-standing problems. On the ironclad Fury, now a venerable flagship adorned with battle scars and honorary plaques from grateful alien species, Kalen watched a new generation of human and allied pilots take to the stars. End quote. They and oppos, relearning fast, whisper, end quote, she observed, a proud smile on her face. End quote. Soon, the whole galaxy will be full of rust buckets. End quote. Whisper, now a respected elder of the scrap fleet, chuckled. End quote. And every single one of them will be a monument to human stubbornness. Cap. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, in its desperate attempts to cling to its old ways, found itself increasingly isolated. Their once impenetrable borders were now porous, their once feared military was a laughingstock, and their once loyal client species had either rebelled or joined the human-led alliance. End quote. They are even infiltrating our cultural archives. End quote. A Vexian historian shrieked, discovering human-modified versions of Vexian historical documents, complete with sarcastic annotations and crude, but effective, diagrams of Vexian design flaws. Kalen, listening to the intercepted comms, just shook her head. End quote. Infiltrating? Nah, shiny. We and oppos, just adding footnotes. You guys left out all the interesting parts. End quote. The galaxy, once a rigid, hierarchical structure, was now a dynamic, interconnected web. The human, end quote, scrap fleet, end quote, had not only defeated an empire but had ushered in a new era of galactic cooperation and innovation. They had shown the universe that strength wasn't oppos, about pristine perfection, but about the messy, unpredictable beauty of collaboration and shared ingenuity. End quote. Grand Admiral, end quote, Vlora reported to the new, increasingly irrelevant Xylos, end quote. Our last remaining client species has formally seceded and joined the Galactic Salvage Exchange. They cited the humans and oppos, unwavering spirit and oppos, ability to fix anything with a wrench and a prayer and oppos, as their primary reasons, end quote. The figurehead Xylos, his mind now completely detached from reality, merely mumbled about, end quote, optimal efficiency, end quote. Vlora's sighed, a sound that was now almost entirely human. End quote. They thought we would perish, Grand Admiral. They thought our and oppos, inefficiency, and oppos would be our downfall. But it was our greatest strength. It was our ability to be imperfect, to learn, to grow, to turn their discarded refuse into our triumph. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, once a cosmic titan, finally collapsed, not with a bang, but with a whimper. A victim of its own rigid perfection. And humanity, with its rust buckets, its duct tape, and its unyielding spirit, stood tall, a beacon of defiant ingenuity in a galaxy that was now, finally, truly free. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human audacity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The fall of the Vexian hegemony was and oppos, a sudden cataclysm. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling, a testament to the corrosive power of human ingenuity against rigid perfection. Grand Admiral Xylos faded into the annals of history as a symbol of a bygone era, while strategist Prime Vlora, the reluctant prophet of chaos, became a key figure in the Vexian diaspora, guiding her people towards a new, more adaptable future. End quote. Our perfection was our prison, counselors. End quote. Vlora taught the younger generation of Vexians, her voice now carrying a deep, resonant wisdom. End quote. The humans showed us the freedom of imperfection. They showed us how to bend, not break. End quote. The Vexian remnants, once proud and unyielding, were now learning to scavenge, to improvise, and to adapt. They were, in a strange twist of fate, becoming more like the very species they had once despised. It was a painful, yet ultimately necessary, evolution. Meanwhile, the Galactic Salvage Exchange, spearheaded by humanity, had become the dominant force in the cosmos. It was a vibrant, interconnected network of species, all contributing their unique skills and resources to build a better, more resilient galaxy. Human ships, still affectionately called, end quote, rust buckets, end quote, by their crews, were now sleek, powerful vessels, their patchwork hulls a badge of honor, a testament to their origins. On the ironclad Fury. Now a legendary vessel displayed in the central hub of the exchange, Kaylin, her hair now streaked with gray, watched a new generation of pilots train. End quote. Remember what I always say, end quote. She and oppos, detail them, her voice raspy with age but still full of fire, end quote. If at ein and oppos, broke, you and oppos, re not trying hard enough to make it better, end quote. Whisper. Now a celebrated inventor and chief architect of the exchange and oppos, vast infrastructure, would often visit, sharing stories of the old days, of duct tape and prayers, and of the time they made a Vexian star silk sing a heavy metal lullaby. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The era of monolithic empires and rigid perfection was over. In its place rose a new age of collaboration, innovation, and glorious, beautiful chaos. Humanity, with its stubborn refusal to conform, its boundless ingenuity, and its knack for turning scrap into triumph, had reshaped the cosmos. End quote. They thought we were just a phase, Cap. End quote. Whisper mused one day, looking out at the bustling trade lanes of the exchange, filled with ships of every conceivable design, many bearing the telltale signs of human, end quote, modifications, end quote, a temporary anomaly, end quote. Kaylin chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. End quote. Anomaly? Nah, whisper. We and oppos, re the new normal. And it and oppos, a hell of a lot more fun. End quote. The Vexian hegemony, once the epitome of galactic order, was now a footnote in history, a cautionary tale taught in schools across the liberated sectors. Their grand, perfect designs had been unable to withstand the relentless, unpredictable force of human ingenuity. End quote. They underestimated our ability to break their rules. End quote. A human historian would lecture, centuries later, to a class of eager young minds. End quote. They built a perfect machine, and we showed them that a perfect machine has no room for surprises. And humanity, my friends, is nothing but surprises. End quote. The galaxy was now a testament to human spirit. From the smallest salvage component to the grandest collaborative projects, the human touch was evident everywhere, a testament to their ability to find solutions where others saw only problems, to find beauty in the broken, and to turn the universe and oppos, discarded refuse into a vibrant, thriving civilization. Kaylin, in her final days, would often sit on the observation deck of the ironclad Fury, looking out at the stars. She had seen an empire fall, not to overwhelming force, but to 1,000 tiny, irritating, and ultimately glorious acts of human defiance. She had seen her, rust buckets, become the instruments of liberation, and her species, once dismissed as cosmic dust, rise to become the architects of a new, chaotic, and wonderfully human galaxy. The universe had laughed at their rust buckets, but those rust buckets had scrapped an empire, and then they had built a better one. And the laughter, now, was all on humanity and Apo's side. The Galactic Salvage Exchange, born from the ashes of Vexian tyranny and forged in the fires of human ingenuity, had blossomed into the dominant power in the cosmos. It was an Apo's an empire, not in the traditional sense, but a sprawling, interconnected network of free species, all bound by the principles of cooperation, resourcefulness, and the occasional, glorious act of scrap and adapt. Grand Admiral Xylos was long forgotten, a relic of a bygone era of rigid perfection. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, lived on in Vexian lore as the one who saw the truth, the one who understood the terrifying beauty of human chaos. The humans did not destroy us with overwhelming force. Vlora and Apo's teachings echoed through the reformed Vexian enclaves, now humble and pragmatic. They destroyed us with ideas. They showed us that true strength is not in control, but in the ability to embrace the unpredictable, to find opportunity in every setback. The Vexians, once the epitome of order, were now learning to improvise, to salvage, to find beauty in the imperfect. They were, perhaps for the first time, truly living, rather than merely existing within their rigid protocols. Meanwhile, humanity, the accidental architects of this new galactic order, continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. Their rust buckets, now sleek, powerful vessels bristling with repurposed alien tech, were at the forefront of exploration, discovery, and, of course, salvage. The ironclad Fury, a living legend, remained the heart of the scrap fleet, its bridge a constant hub of innovation and audacious planning. On the ironclad Fury and Apo's bridge, Kaelin, now a revered matriarch of the human species, watched her great-granddaughter, a young, fiery pilot named Lyra, expertly navigate a salvage Vexian stealth fighter through a dense asteroid field. She and Apo's got your touch, Cap, Whisper, now a wizened but still sharp-witted elder, chuckled. That same reckless abandon. Kaelin smiled. Reckless abandon, Whisper, is just another word for and Apo's, bold ingenuity and Apo's, when it works. The galaxy was a testament to humanity and Apo's enduring spirit. Every new discovery, every technological breakthrough, every diplomatic triumph bore the indelible mark of human influence. The scrap lords had not only won a war, they had redefined the very concept of galactic civilization. They say the Vexians are finally learning to laugh, Cap. Lyra reported one day, her voice full of youthful exuberance. Apparently, they and Apo's, even trying to make and Apo's, jokes and Apo's, now. Though they and Apo's, still a bit, logical. Kaelin chuckled. Give and Apo's, time, kid. We and Apo's, get and Apo's, there. Everyone deserves a good laugh, especially at themselves. The Vexian hegemony, once a source of fear and oppression, was now a cautionary tale, a historical footnote. Their perfect, unyielding systems had crumbled under the weight of human adaptability, proving that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in flawless design, but in the ability to thrive in the face of chaos. They thought we were weak, insignificant, a blight on their perfect tapestry. A human orator declared at a galactic summit, centuries after the rust bucket rodeo. They thought they could sweep us away. But they forgot one crucial thing. You can end Apo's sweep away a species that thrives on the mess you leave behind. You can end Apo's cleanse a species that turns your trash into their treasure. You can end Apo's defeat a species that laughs in the face of impossible odds and then proceeds to duct tape the universe back together, better than it was before. The galaxy, once a cold, sterile place of rigid order, was now a vibrant, messy, and wonderfully unpredictable cosmos. It was a galaxy where, scrap, was a badge of honor, where improvisation was a virtue, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Galactic Salvage Exchange, now a flourishing confederation of free worlds, stood as a monument to humanity and Apos' audacious spirit. The Vexian hegemony was a distant, almost mythical memory, its rigid perfection having crumbled under the relentless, unpredictable pressure of human ingenuity. Grand Admiral Xylos was a name whispered in historical archives, a symbol of a failed ideology. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, was revered by the reformed Vexians as the one who had guided them from the precipice of extinction, teaching them the invaluable lessons of adaptability and the beauty of imperfection. End quote. We once sought to impose order upon the cosmos. End quote. Vlora and Apos' final testament, preserved in holographic form, resonated through the Vexian learning centers. End quote. The humans showed us that the cosmos is order, but an order far more complex and beautiful than our rigid logic could comprehend. They showed us the dance of chaos and how to move with it, not against it. End quote. The Vexians, once masters of sterile perfection, had become skilled artisans of salvage. Their new vessels a blend of elegant Vexian design and robust human modification. They had learned to laugh, to improvise, and to appreciate the messy, vibrant tapestry of life. Meanwhile, humanity, the accidental architects of this new galactic era, continued to innovate. The ironclad Fury, now a historical landmark and a living museum, still hummed with the echoes of its past battles, a testament to the power of a wrench and a prayer. Its bridge, once a chaotic symphony of sparking wires and shouted commands, was now a quiet place of reflection and inspiration for new generations. On a newly discovered exoplanet, a young human engineer, a direct descendant of Kalen, was overseeing the construction of a new orbital defense system, a marvel of repurposed alien tech and human ingenuity. End quote. Grandma Kalen always said, end quote, the engineer mused to their alien colleagues, end quote, that the best defense is a good offense, especially if your offense involves turning their own stuff against them. End quote. Whisper, now a legendary figure, often visited the ironclad Fury, sharing tales of the end quote, old days end quote, with wide-eyed youngsters. End quote. We didn't end Apos' have fancy blueprints back then. End quote. Whisper would say, their voice raspy with age. End quote. We had a problem, a pile of junk, and a whole lot of stubbornness. And that, my friends, is how you build an empire out of rust. End quote. The galaxy was a testament to humanity and Apos' enduring legacy. Trade flourished, new technologies emerged from unexpected collaborations, and the spirit of end quote, scrap and adapt end quote, permeated every corner of the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony was a distant memory, a cautionary tale of what happens when perfection becomes a cage. End quote. They thought they could erase us. End quote. A human poet wrote, centuries after the end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo. End quote. In an epic ode to humanity and Apos' triumph. End quote. They thought their gleaming ships would sweep us into oblivion. But they forgot that we are the dust that settles on their perfection, the grit that jams their gears, the beautiful, unpredictable chaos that eventually breaks every rigid rule. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets became the hammers that shattered their gilded cage, and the seeds that grew a galaxy of freedom. End quote. The universe, once dominated by the cold logic of the Vexians, was now a warm, vibrant, and wonderfully messy place. It was a galaxy where ingenuity was celebrated, where collaboration was paramount, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Galactic Salvage Exchange, a testament to collaboration and ingenuity, thrived across the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony was merely a historical footnote, its rigid perfection having been outmaneuvered and outlasted by humanity and Apos' boundless adaptability. Grand Admiral Xylos remained a cautionary figure, a symbol of the arrogance that had led to the hegemony and Apos' downfall. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, became a revered figure among the reformed Vexians, her teachings on the importance of embracing imperfection foundational to their new, pragmatic way of life. We sought to control the universe with flawless design. Vlora and Apos' holographic lectures, now standard curriculum for all Vexian youth, explained. The humans showed us that the universe is inherently chaotic, and that true mastery lies not in eliminating chaos, but in dancing with it. The Vexians, once obsessed with pristine aesthetics, now valued functionality and resilience. Their ships, while still elegant, incorporated human-inspired modifications, a blend of Vexian grace and human grit. They had learned to appreciate the beauty of a well-placed patch, the efficiency of a jury-rigged solution. Meanwhile, humanity, the accidental pioneers of this new galactic age, continued to push the boundaries of innovation. The ironclad Fury, now a revered monument, stood as a silent testament to the scrap fleet and Apos' audacious beginnings. Its legacy lived on in every new vessel, every salvage component, and every audacious plan hatched by human engineers. On a newly established research station, a team of human and alien scientists, including descendants of Kalen and Whisper, were working on a groundbreaking project, a ship capable of traversing previously impassable cosmic anomalies, built entirely from salvaged and repurposed impossible technologies. Grandpa Whisper always said, a young human engineer commented, that the universe is just a giant junkyard waiting to be explored. The galaxy was a vibrant tapestry of interconnected cultures, all sharing knowledge and resources through the galactic salvage exchange. The spirit of scrap and adapt had become a universal principle, fostering a new era of peace and unprecedented technological advancement. The Vexian hegemony and Apos' fall had not led to anarchy, but to a more dynamic, more resilient cosmic order. They thought their perfection was an impenetrable shield, a human philosopher wrote, reflecting on the Rust Bucket Rodeo, centuries later. They believed their logic was unassailable. But they failed to account for the human element, the stubborn refusal to quit, the ingenious ability to find a solution where none existed, and the sheer, unadulterated joy of turning their trash into our triumph. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets didn't end Apos' just win a war. They built a better universe. The universe, once dominated by the cold, sterile logic of the Vexians, was now a warm, vibrant, and wonderfully messy place. It was a galaxy where ingenuity was celebrated, where collaboration was paramount, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Galactic Salvage Exchange, a testament to the triumph of adaptability over rigid dogma, flourished across the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony was a cautionary tale, its demise a stark reminder that true strength lay not in unyielding perfection, but in the fluid embrace of change. Grand Admiral Xylos and Apos' name was synonymous with hubris, while strategist Prime Vlora was celebrated by the reformed Vexians as the visionary who had guided them towards a future built on resilience and collaboration. Our ancestors sought to control the universe through absolute order. Vlora and Apos' preserved wisdom, now a cornerstone of Vexian education, taught. The humans showed us that the universe is chaos, and that true mastery lies in learning to dance within its unpredictable rhythms. The Vexians, shedding their old ways, became integral members of the exchange, contributing their meticulous analytical skills to the grand cosmic project of scrap and adapt. Their ships, a harmonious blend of Vexian elegance and human ruggedness, traversed the stars, symbols of a species transformed. Meanwhile, humanity, the unexpected catalyst for this galactic renaissance, continued to innovate. The ironclad Fury, now enshrined as a universal heritage site, stood as a silent, powerful testament to the origins of the scrap fleet. Its legacy was woven into the very fabric of the new galactic order, inspiring countless acts of ingenuity and defiance. On a remote, newly terraformed world, a group of human and alien engineers, including direct descendants of Kalen and Whisper, were developing a revolutionary new propulsion system powered entirely by repurposed cosmic debris. End quote. Great-Grandma Kalen always said, end quote, a young human engineer remarked, end quote, that every piece of junk has a story and a potential future. End quote. The galaxy was a vibrant, interconnected web of cultures, sharing knowledge and resources through the galactic salvage exchange. The spirit of, end quote, scrap and adapt, end quote, had transcended its origins, becoming a universal philosophy that fostered unprecedented peace and technological advancement. The Vexian hegemony and Opos' fall had paved the way for a more dynamic, more resilient, and infinitely more interesting cosmos. End quote. They thought their perfection would endure forever. End quote. A human historian recounted in a popular galactic documentary, centuries after the end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo? End quote. End quote. They believed their logic was unassailable, but they underestimated the power of a species that refused to be defined by their limitations, a species that saw potential in every discarded fragment, and a species that knew how to turn a pile of rust into the foundation of a new, glorious future. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets didn't end Opos. T just won a war. They built a better universe, piece by glorious piece. End quote. The universe, once dominated by the cold, sterile logic of the Vexians, was now a warm, vibrant, and wonderfully messy place. It was a galaxy where ingenuity was celebrated, where collaboration was paramount, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Galactic Salvage Exchange, a beacon of interspecies cooperation and boundless innovation, stood as a testament to the enduring legacy of humanity. The Vexian hegemony, a cautionary tale of rigid perfection, had faded into the annals of history, its once unyielding grip on the cosmos replaced by the fluid embrace of adaptability. Grand Admiral Xylos was a forgotten name, a symbol of a flawed ideology. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, was revered by the reformed Vexians, her wisdom having guided them from the precipice of extinction towards a future built on resilience and the profound beauty of imperfection. End quote. Our ancestors believed that only absolute order could bring prosperity. End quote. Vlora and Opos, as timeless teachings, etched into the very fabric of Vexian society, proclaimed. End quote. The humans showed us that true prosperity flourishes in the fertile ground of controlled chaos, where every discarded piece holds the potential for rebirth. End quote. The Vexians, once slaves to their own flawless designs, now embrace the art of salvage and improvisation. Their ships, a harmonious fusion of their innate elegance and humanity and Opos' rugged pragmatism, traverse the stars, symbols of a species reborn. They had learned to find joy in the unexpected and strength in what they once considered flaws. Meanwhile, humanity, the accidental architects of this new galactic era, continued to redefine the boundaries of possibility. The ironclad Fury, a hallowed relic, stood as a silent, powerful monument to the scrap fleet and Opos' audacious beginnings. Its spirit lived on in every new vessel, every groundbreaking invention, and every bold venture undertaken by human and allied engineers. On a newly discovered, resource-rich asteroid, a team of human and alien prospectors, including direct descendants of Kalen and Whisper, were pioneering a revolutionary method of asteroid mining, utilizing repurposed Vexian drills and human-designed, self-replicating nanobots. End quote. Great-Great-Grandpa Whisper always said, end quote. A young human prospector quipped, end quote, that one man and Opos' trash is another galaxy and Opos' treasure. End quote. The galaxy was a vibrant, interconnected tapestry of cultures, sharing knowledge and resources through the galactic salvage exchange. The philosophy of, end quote, scrap and adapt, end quote, had evolved into a universal ethos, fostering unprecedented peace, technological advancement, and a deep appreciation for the diverse forms of ingenuity across the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony and Apos' fall had not led to chaos, but to a more dynamic, more resilient, and infinitely more interesting galactic order. End quote. They thought their perfection was the ultimate defense. End quote. A human philosopher mused in a widely acclaimed galactic treatise, centuries after the end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo? End quote. End quote. They believed their logic was an unbreachable fortress, but they failed to account for the boundless creativity of a species that saw every obstacle as an opportunity, every broken piece as a building block, and every impossible challenge as an invitation to innovate. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets didn't end Apos' just win a war. They forged a new universe, where the only limit was imagination, and the only rule was to never stop adapting. End quote. The universe, once dominated by the cold, sterile logic of the Vexians, was now a warm, vibrant, and wonderfully messy place. It was a galaxy where ingenuity was celebrated, where collaboration was paramount, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. The Galactic Salvage Exchange. A sprawling testament to interspecies collaboration and the boundless potential of ingenuity, had become the undisputed heart of the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony, a relic of a bygone era, served as a stark historical lesson on the perils of rigid perfection. Grand Admiral Xylos was a forgotten name, his ideology utterly discredited. Strategist Prime Vlora, however, was celebrated as a revered figure among the reformed Vexians, her teachings on adaptability and the profound beauty of imperfection having guided her people towards a future of true resilience. End quote. Our ancestors clung to the illusion of absolute control. End quote. Vlora and Apos' final, poignant message, broadcast across the Vexian home systems, resonated with deep wisdom. End quote. The humans showed us that true strength lies not in imposing order, but in embracing the inherent dynamism of the cosmos, finding harmony within its beautiful, unpredictable chaos. End quote. The Vexians, once defined by their pristine designs, now excelled in the art of adaptive engineering, their vessels a seamless blend of their innate elegance and humanity and Apos' robust, often unconventional, modifications. They had learned to appreciate the narrative embedded in every salvaged component, the story of its past life, and its potential for a new one. Meanwhile, humanity, the accidental architects of this new galactic age, continue to push the frontiers of possibility. The ironclad Fury, now a hallowed relic, stood as a silent, powerful monument to the scrap fleet and Apos' audacious beginnings. Its spirit lived on in every new vessel, every groundbreaking invention, and every bold venture undertaken by human and allied engineers. On a newly established deep space research outpost, a diverse team of human and alien scientists, including direct descendants of Kalen and Whisper, were collaborating on a project to harness the energy of a localized space-time anomaly, utilizing repurposed Vexian temporal displacement units and human-designed fractal energy collectors. End quote. Great-great-great-grandma Kalen always said, end quote, a young human researcher remarked, end quote, that the universe is just waiting for someone to figure out how to put its broken pieces back together in a new, exciting way. End quote. The galaxy was a vibrant, interconnected tapestry of cultures, sharing knowledge and resources through the Galactic Salvage Exchange. The philosophy of, end quote, scrap and adapt, end quote, had transcended its origins, evolving into a universal ethos that fostered unprecedented peace, technological advancement, and a profound appreciation for the diverse forms of ingenuity across the cosmos. The Vexian hegemony and Apos' fall had not led to chaos, but to a more dynamic, more resilient, and infinitely more interesting galactic order. End quote. They thought their perfection was an eternal truth. End quote. A human philosopher reflected in a widely acclaimed galactic treatise, centuries after the end quote, Rust Bucket Rodeo? End quote. End quote. They believed their logic was the ultimate law, but they failed to account for the boundless creativity of a species that saw every challenge as an invitation, every limitation as a springboard for innovation, and every impossible dream as a blueprint for a glorious reality. They laughed at our rust buckets. But those rust buckets didn't end Oppos. T just won a war. They forged a new universe, where the only limit was imagination, and the only rule was to never stop adapting, never stop building, and never stop dreaming. End quote. The universe, once dominated by the cold, sterile logic of the Vexians, was now a warm, vibrant, and wonderfully messy place. It was a galaxy where ingenuity was celebrated, where collaboration was paramount, and where the most unlikely heroes had risen from the cosmic junkyard to build a new, brighter future. And at the heart of it all were the humans, with their rust buckets, their wrenches, and their unyielding, audacious spirit. They had been laughed at, dismissed, and targeted for cleansing. But they had turned the tables, not with overwhelming force, but with sheer, unadulterated human ingenuity. The universe had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that knows how to make something out of nothing, and how to turn nothing into a glorious, empire-scrapping triumph. /prosody/speak.